When you think about loved ones in your life who have passed away, where do those thoughts take you? Do you believe in life after death? Have you ever gone to a psychic or a tarot card reader? I've actually done this several times, and I really wanted to believe it was real, but I always came away fixating on the one or two things the person was close on and forgetting all the things that they missed on. These people were allegedly doing readings looking at what might happen in the future, but they were not reaching out to loved ones that have passed away. Bob Ginsberg lost his daughter in 2002 and in his search for peace discovered that our consciousness survives our physical death, and he believes that people, called mediums, can help us communicate with them. Now, obviously, it's up to you to decide whether you believe this or not, but it's worth listening to Bob and hearing the comfort that this has brought him and some fascinating stories of how people have reached out and communicated with loved ones who have passed away. I'm George Siegel, and this is the Tell Us How to Make It Better podcast. Every week, we introduce you to people who are working on real-world problems and providing actual solutions. Tell Us How to Make It Better is partnering with the Readiness Lab, the home for podcasts, webinars, and training in the field of emergency and disaster services. Bob Ginsberg, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure to be here with you. Thanks.
I was so curious when I came across all your information because I guess I'm a skeptical, want to believe kind of guy, and we can go into that in just a minute. But first, I thought we'd just kind of lay the foundation here. Tell us what the problem is that you've been working on and what you're doing to make it better.
Well, the problem is that, we find today, especially just look around us. I mean, everything that's going on, people are starting to question if there's any meaning and purpose to their lives. I mean, everything certainly appears to be random. And baby boomers that are coming of age like myself I never really questioned if it's possible that anything happens next. And I'm talking not from a religious perspective, just from a logic perspective. So, what I've been working on for the last 20 years is evidence that shows that we're more than our physical bodies. And along with that, that our minds can act independently of our brains, which then suggests that after our body physically dies, we continue in some form. So, if one can come to that belief, that inner knowing, they can live their lives more fully because they don't, the fear aspect, which dominates the lives of many people today, the fear of death, kind of goes away. So in a nutshell, that's where we're at.
So who was it? It was Houdini or somebody that said they're going to find a way to come back after they passed away. And we've never seen any evidence of this, but through mediums, and you have on your website where I guess you certify them, you're able to reach out to people. People don't actually come back, but you're able to communicate with them. Tell me what's going on here.
Yeah, well, the theory behind mediumship is that our consciousness, and when I say consciousness, you can use that term interchangeably with your soul or your mind or whatever you prefer, can act independently of the brain. So that means that, for instance, with things like telepathy and ESP and things like that, it shows remote viewing, that some people can extend their consciousness to another site, and therefore, since after our physical death, our consciousness still continues, the assumption is that we can still communicate because we go to the next dimension with our memories and personality intact. So what mediums do, the ones that really can do what they claim, and I'll be the first one to tell you that 90% of them are full of crap, but there's 10% that really can do it. So they're communicating. It's still, mediumship is mind-to-mind communication, except one party, the person that's in the spirit realm, doesn't have a body anymore, but they still have a mind. So yes, in mediumship, some evidential mediums are able to communicate facts and evidence that people on the other side communicate. theoretically, it's things that they could not have possibly known or researched, which is difficult in today's information age. I mean, I could be talking to you now and have your Facebook page up on my screen and start spitting back everything that I see on Facebook. So you
I would be
mentioned,
very impressed by that trick, by the
yeah.
way.
Well, we actually one of the mediums that we had certified told us a story where he caught another medium that was doing just that. The medium was doing a reading via Zoom. And, in one part of the medium screen, she had, the sitter, the person who's getting the reading up. And on the other side of her screen, she did have that sitter's Facebook page open. And she was reading back all the information. And the sitter, not knowing anything about mediumship, thought that this medium was the greatest medium in the world. Wow, how did she know all this? But it was a totally fraudulent, reading. But mediumship is only one part of it. There's other evidence, near-death experiences and deathbed visions and reincarnation and all sorts of after-death communications that we research and study. And when you step back and you look at all the evidence, it's easy to dismiss any one discipline of research. But the thing that makes the most sense when you look at everything as a whole is that our consciousness does, survive a physical death.
There was a story on Dateline several years ago where they kind of exposed the charlatans in this. And it seems like in any industry where there could be something fascinating, it also brings out the people that are going to try to make a buck off of it and con people. Now, full disclosure, I've gone to psychics for years because I'm one of those people that wanted to believe. And I always walk out of there with those one or two kernels that they might have gotten right, because I think some people are good at reading people's body language. If you were an expert at that and you talked to me, you could pull things out of me and lead things out of me. And if you just hit on one or two, I forget the 50 that you might have whiffed on that had no bearing. I had one psychic back in the 90s tell me I was going to have a redheaded child. I have a redheaded child, but I don't know what the odds. I mean, so I could sit there and go, wow, they were so good.
Yeah.
Or what were the odds? It was 1 in 3, 1 in 4.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on all that?
Well, there is a difference between psychics and mediums, so a lot of us, probably all of us, have some degree of intuitive ability. With some it's more enhanced than the other. So what you described, if this psychic said to you that you were going to have a child, with red hair, that's not information that she or he was getting from the other side, so to speak. It's mind to mind, telepathic communication. She's picking up information, and of course, you were in no position to verify it whether it was right or wrong, But
Sure.
there are some people that, in addition to being psychic, they have the ability. It's like a different skill set. They can communicate with a discarnate entity, and you can evaluate the evidence. So, and what you said is exactly right. A lot of mediums, the ones that are not legit, use cold reading techniques. They look at your dilation of your eye pupils. They look at little subtle things that you do. If you acknowledge something, with a head nod or a slight head nod, they'll continue with that. They'll repeat the same things over and over again. As a matter of fact, researchers, scientists that study mediumship, they prefer when the sitter and the medium are blind to each other. So it eliminates the possibility of the medium using cold reading techniques. I mean, you could be the medium now and giving me a reading, and you'll look at me and you could size up my age or maybe my ethnicity and so forth. And you could say, hey, Bob, you have a great grandmother in spirit? And shit, yeah, she'd be 130. So it's a good bet. But if I was scoring it, I'd have to score it as a hit. But is it evidential? No, not at all. So when we conduct our medium certification process, we score very specific information is weighted more heavily than just general stuff. I could give you a reading now and probably get a 90% accuracy, but it's all going to be general bullshit.
I'm a short story. It would be easy.
Yeah.
That's going for the low hanging fruit. Now,
Yeah.
in 2002, you tragically lost your daughter. And is that when you started getting into this? And did you feel like through this, you were able to communicate with her, or did you just find peace in just understanding to let go?
Yeah. Well, the story behind that was that, the morning, my son and daughter were involved in a car accident, and my daughter did not survive, as you mentioned, and my son had very serious injuries. And the morning of that, the day of the accident, my wife at 3 o'clock in the morning shot up in bed and was trembling and shaking and was like white. And I said, "What's the matter?" And she couldn't even talk. And I pressed her. I said, "What's the matter?" And she said, "Something horrible is going to happen today." And I said, "Well, what does that mean?" What? And she said, "I can't tell you, but our lives are going to be changed forever today." So I didn't believe in any of, I didn't believe in anything regarding like a vision or telepathy or, mediumship or anything like that. But um, there were times together, we were married for 46 years, there were times together in our lives where she had similar visions. They were all good things, but they all turned out to be exactly the way she described it. They happened. So just logically, it told me if she was right then, she could be right now. And to make a long story short, I checked on our three kids throughout the day. And at night, I let my guard down. I let it fade from my awareness, and then it happened. So after a few months passed and it became clear that my son was going to recover from his injuries, I remembered that night. I said, "Wait a second." I said, "How is this possible?" I mean, how did my wife Fran know? Because she knew. I saw her. She was shaking and trembling. That started me on a quest. I was a skeptic, but I was an open-minded skeptic. I would follow the evidence wherever it went. And I met with scientists and researchers all across the United States that studied consciousness. And I started uncovering and listening to the evidence that they, had to offer. And one thing led to another. And I even, we formed this foundation, Forever Family Foundation, in 2003. And for 7, 8 years after we formed the foundation, even though I was giving talks about evidence of an afterlife and supporting the bereaved, I was a hypocrite because I fully didn't buy it myself. It took me a good 7 or 8 years after we started the foundation until I came to that point where I had to acknowledge that, that this is real.
Now, have you hear stories of people say a house is haunted or there's spirits in a house. I mean, to what level are we talking about, and what kind of evidentiary proof do you have that's made you a believer? What other than, I mean, what your wife went through, and
Yeah.
I've experienced that too, where I've seen something that was going to happen, but that's not the same as communicating with somebody in the afterlife.
Exactly. I mean, precognition is catching a glimpse of the future, but it doesn't have anything to do with, communicating with those who have passed. You know, Ghosts or apparitions, really the same thing. They're really visitations. I had, well, on that subject, I'll tell you a quick story. When we moved from one house to another many years ago, my youngest daughter, Bailey, she was very upset. She loved our old house and she was really pissed that we moved. And for years, she kept pressuring us. She wanted to go visit her room in the old house, and every week she'd say, "Come on, Mom." And my wife would say, "No, Bailey, we can't do that. It's not appropriate. We can't just knock on the door and say that you want to see your old room." And she wouldn't give up. I mean, this was month after month, year after year. She just wanted to see that her old room. So my daughter, dies, and about a month later, um, my wife's first cousin was at some wedding or affair, and she happened to know the people that bought our old home. And the person that bought our old home grabbed my wife's cousin and said, "Can I tell you something?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, um, her daughter, who had the same room that my daughter had, in the old house." And she said that her daughter came down, one night, uh, really upset. She said she had this vision of a young girl walking across the room. And she went on to add, I mean, her daughter was like 11 or 12 years old at the time and never, ever had a bad dream or never experienced anything like this. And her mother reassured her and said, "Okay, you were probably dreaming. It's nothing, go back to sleep," which the girl did. In the morning, the family is gathered together in the kitchen having breakfast. and on the newspaper is on the table, and they open up the newspaper and they see the story of the accident that my kids were in, was on the front page of the paper. And that was literally, when she saw the vision, it was about 30 minutes after my daughter had passed. So, when I stood back from that, even though I didn't really believe in any of this stuff, I said, wait a second, where would be the first place that she would go? I mean, after years of wanting to see that old room, and then 30 minutes after she passes, the daughter sees the vision of a young girl walk across the room. That hit me, because that was not probable. Statistically, it was not, realistic. So that was one of the things that happened to me that got me on this track of moving towards a vague hope to a belief that we do indeed survive. And then I had for me personally, I wasn't intuitive at all. My wife was having experiences all over the place, which I, dismissed or refused to acknowledge. Some people have dream visitations, which are, when you're in this REM stage of sleep, the theory is that a person, a discarnate entity, sees that conduit and get through, because your monkey chatter mind is set aside, and there's a channel to get through. And dream visitations are very different from regular discombobulated, disorienting dreams that are a mixture of everything. Because in a dream visitation, you could see your loved one and talk to them or hug them or kiss them and have a conversation, so forth. And I started to have these visitations for my daughter. I had 74 of them over a 3-year period, and I would journal each and every one. And each one was amazing, So I came to the belief that that was the way in which my daughter was letting me know that, that she was still around. So I know it sounds kind of absurd, but yet it's not talked about much, but it happens in the general public every day, and it has been for thousands of years, So.
Well, I'm pretty cynical, but I can't dismiss that because it's real to you, and it's something that gives you comfort. So it's hard to take that away from somebody. And I think most people would like to believe that that's actually true. But even that, closing your eyes and having those experiences or those flashbacks is different from actually reaching beyond and having those communications. I mean, that story about your daughter going to her room and a total stranger, that's a little harder to explain that one away.
Yeah, I don't, from formal research, let's take example, near-death experience research. I mean, there are a lot of medical doctors that have been engaged in NDE research for many years. To me, that's really compelling evidence, because you have people that meet every definition that medical science has for death. They have no brain waves, they have no respiration, they have no heartbeat, they have no reflexes. Medical science says they're dead. And yet they get resuscitated, and when they come back, they are able to relate things that they could not possibly have known. They see things that went on in the operating room. They can describe conversations that went on. There are famous cases where people are above their bodies outside of a hospital and see things that are on a ledge 9 stories up. So, and these people report similar things. Not every near-death experiencer has the same things, but things such as meeting with their deceased loved ones, being encompassed in a welcoming light, being imbued with knowledge they didn't have before. But most importantly, they all describe having clear and lucid thinking. And the common objection to the research is that, well, this is just near-death experience is just like anoxia, a lack of oxygen to the brain, so you're hallucinating. But people that experience anoxia, like fighter pilots that are in high altitudes, they don't have clear and lucid thinking. I mean, they have fragmented. They're like thrashing all over the place. It's not something. It's quite different. So I kind of dismiss that argument. When, there are thousands and thousands of these cases over the years, and that's a pretty strong body of evidence that something's going on beyond the body.
Yeah, I've heard the explanation that that's just your brain, like the ultimate dream it's having or whatever. But then when you talk about seeing things that they would have no knowledge of where they were, kind of throws that disbelief out the window, right? It's like, well, how did they see those things? How do they know those things?
Yeah,
It's curious.
it is curious. And it happens all the time. I mean, another type of evidence of these end of life experiences, deathbed visions. There are people that were in that window, let's say 2 weeks out from their death or just before, that they reach out and they appear to be having conversations with, their deceased loved ones who presumably are there to help them cross over to the other side. I had kind of it was almost a humorous incident when my mom was passing. She was sitting in a recliner and we were sitting in a semicircle facing her. And directly in front of her was an empty chair. And all of a sudden, she was in pretty bad shape. I mean, I think it was about a week or 10 days before she died. She starts reaching out and looking at that empty chair and talking with her deceased mom. And the other people in the room didn't know what was going on. They just thought, this is just hallucinations. But my wife and I, having studied this for so many years, we knew what was going on. And then in the middle of this, my father walks into the room and he sees the empty chair. And he sits down in the empty chair. And my mother starts going nuts because my father had no idea of knowing that he sat on his mother-in-law. So my father's like bewildered, and I'll try to explain it to him, but it's just so much he could handle. So, but this thing, I mean, matter of fact, that if you talk to people that work in hospice, and hospice care professionals and medical doctors, that's how they know when somebody is about to pass, when they start seeing their deceased loved ones. So I believe that everybody has such an experience, but they may be physically or mentally incapacitated and they can't relate what they see to others, but nonetheless it happens.
Do you believe people are reincarnated and come back? Or
That
once
was
you're
the
gone,
that was the biggest piece of the puzzle that I was having a hard time with. But then there are several prominent medical doctors that have been studying reincarnation for 40 years, and they've amassed thousands and thousands of cases of children who have past life memories. I don't know if you watched the Surviving Death docuseries on Netflix. I mean, we're a part of that series, but
I'm
a
going
lot
to
of,
now.
yeah, a lot of the people that we work with, one of the episodes was strictly about what you're talking about, reincarnation. And they take these memories, and the scientist becomes an investigator. He pulls medical records and dental records and school reports and hospital and so forth, and police records, and sometimes, if they're lucky, the child remembers where they lived in the past life, and they go to visit the present family. And some of the cases are just so compelling with information that, years ago there was no internet and you couldn't look up all these things, and it was impossible to research, especially in third world countries. And so I think, I believe that reincarnation is real. I don't think that everybody reincarnates. I think it's, some sort of a self choice, but it is very difficult for a lot of people to wrap their heads around.
Would it be safe to say, so you don't fear death because you believe that we go somewhere?
Yeah, and that's the whole point of our work at the foundation and working with the bereaved, because if they come to believe that their loved one still exists in some form, that's enormously helpful in their grief. There have been many peer-reviewed studies that appeared in medical journals that show that those who believe in an afterlife do a lot better in the grief than those who don't. And that makes sense, because that's the only thing that can give you any hope to keep going. I'm not interested in a vague hope or a religious hope or, pure faith. I'm the kind of guy that wants hard evidence of, thinking with my left brain. So that's why it took me so long to be convinced. But yeah, I've lost all my fear of death, and that comes with a certain amount of freedom as you navigate your physical life, because I'm not worried about it.
So what's the process for people that want to work with you and that they want to try to understand this better, maybe have you a medium reach out? What do they do?
Well, I mean, when I go to our website, foreverfamilyfoundation.org, and a lot of the things that we've been discussing here today appears on our website. So it's information. I mean, we're not therapists, we're not medical, professionals. We just, find information can be helpful. Bibliotherapy, just reading about this stuff, can give you hope. Personal experiences. I think there's two approaches you could take to get to that belief in an afterlife. One is from becoming aware of all the evidence and reading all the books, and the other is from having some sort of a profound personal experience that could be in a dream visitation, or it could be a medium reading, or a near-death experience, or some sort of vision that you have. I mean, we don't have any involvement with the mediums other than evaluating the evidence they provide under controlled conditions, so we can attest to the fact that they're, at least during the evaluation procedure, that they're the real deal. But people, if they want a reading, can go on a website, look up certified mediums, and these are all vetted mediums. And by the way, there's no difference in the information that they're able to communicate, whether they're sitting directly in front of you physically, like in their office, or via Zoom or the telephone. I mean, think about it. I mean, if you're talking about communicating with another dimension, so what difference does 3 feet or 3,000 miles make?
Well,
So
it seems like it's easier to cheat if they're not right in front of you. At least
yeah.
you feel like if you're sitting in the same room, there's some more control over the environment.
Yeah, you would think, but then usually they'll collect your name in advance. You don't want to give them much information, but so they could do some research on you, beforehand. After my wife passed 2 years ago, and in the almost 20 years that we've been doing this work, I never ever, neither did my wife, get a reading from one of the mediums that we certified, even though I know that they're among the best. And the reason that I never got a reading, because I knew I couldn't trust the information, because they knew too much about me and my story. But after my wife passed, Leslie Kane, who wrote the book Surviving Death, upon which the Netflix series is based, she was researching the book, and she got a reading from a medium that was in Ireland. And she asked me if she could come out to my home with the transcripts of the reading, so that I can score it, because she knew that's what I did. And I did that, and I was tremendously impressed by the readings that she got. There was like, the woman was like 95% accurate. So after my wife passed, Leslie called me and said, "Would you like to have a reading with this medium?" And ordinarily I'd say no, but I figured this was an opportunity, and I already knew that this medium was good. So I said, okay, on one condition. The only information I'm going to give her is my name is Bob, and God knows how many Bobs there are in this universe, so she can't look up Bob. And I said, I won't pay for the reading with my information. So I asked my friend to pay for the reading in advance using her, PayPal account. And I got a reading, and it was a wonderfully accurate and evidential. And I'm scoring the actual reading as she's giving me the information. So I could trust the information. I knew that there wasn't any, there was no way that she could have researched me before she had, and then I was able to take the information. So I didn't question. It's better if you don't have to question something afterwards.
What does a good reading with a medium cost?
That's a good question, and it's all over the map. I think that a good reading with a medium could cost anywhere from $150 to $1,000, and that is outrageous. One of the problems that we have at the foundation, is that we developed this certification program in 2005 as simply as a resource for the bereaved. We want people to be able to go to not get taken. And many, because of how we grew in size as a foundation and the publicity, a lot of the mediums that we have certified over the years have become famous. They have TV shows, they write best-selling books, and you know what happens then? They do fewer and fewer readings. They charge more and more money. And that kind of defeats the purpose of our, the program. And that's why I'm constantly trying to identify more mediums that can really do what they claim. Because if you're in grief and you desperately want a reading with a medium, and you go on their website and you see that there's a 3-year waiting list and it's $500 for a reading, it doesn't do you much good,
No, that's not a real help. So what advice would you have for somebody who has just lost a loved one and they're just kind of searching for meaning in all of that? What would you tell people?
I would just remind them to remain open. Unlike myself, I was dismissing things and synchronicities that were happening all around me because it didn't fit into my frame of reference of what was possible. Oddly enough, once I had the science end of it to back up, then I started opening up to recognize, some of these things. But, just keep it learning and exploring, read, talk to others. And most importantly, people have these experiences, these after-death communications, people call them signs all the time, but they never talk about them with anybody else for fear of being ridiculed or labeled, or dismissed. But if people started sharing the experiences that they have more often, it would become more accepted, and make a big difference in people's outlook and how they, in their search for meaning and purpose.
So what's the best way for people to get in touch with you? It'll all be in the show notes, but what would you say is the best way to reach out?
foreverfamilyfoundation.org. I write a personal blog at beyondthefivesenses.com. That's just a way for me to get my thoughts out so I don't explode. My book is called The Medium Explosion. I have another book coming out in a few months, but we won't talk about that yet. And that's the best way.
All right. Hey, Bob, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks.
I'm on the fence.
Pleasure.
I want to believe, but everything you say makes a lot of sense. And I wish you continued success with it.
Thanks. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's Tell Us How to Make It Better podcast. All the information to get in touch with Bob, as I mentioned, is right there in the show notes. And there's a contact form there that if you have anything you'd like to see on a future episode or questions, comments, complaints, anything you want to talk about, please reach out and get in touch with me. And all my social media contacts are on there as well. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.